In our last video, we taught you how to ideate your podcast idea, and today I'm going to try and convince you to not start a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Rich Cardona, and I'm a podcast producer and podcaster, and I am trying to walk you through all the basics of what you need to do to start a podcast. And in our last video, we made a pros and cons list. Like, what are the pros to this podcast? What are the cons to this podcast? Like, what ideas should I be thinking of? All those things. Now that you've kind of done that, I want to kind of walk you backwards to really determine, like, is this even going to be worth it? Is this going to be worth my time? And we're going to answer about 5 simple questions that are going to help you arrive to that conclusion. So let's begin. For full transparency, I do not have a script. I am literally like, I got my stuff, I got my lights, I got my camera, and I am just going. I have some bullets that I'm looking at right here, but I just want to do this like as raw and authentically as possible. So I wrote down a couple things, which means that I'm probably going to leave some things out unintentionally, but my goal is always keep you in the right direction with your podcasting efforts and needs. So here we go. The first question you need to ask yourself is, will I fade? Okay, in the last video I mentioned that pod fade is around 7 episodes, and pod fade is this industry term for when people just kind of stop for whatever reason. The workflow, it costs too much, they hate how they sound, they don't have 1 million downloads, like all the ridiculous things that make us cheapen podcasting, and the belief that it's so easy is a lot of the reasons why people stop podcasting to begin with. So the only way you're going to know if you are going to have pod fade or not is by answering this critical question, and that is, can I do this for the next 5 years? Okay, are you on a track in your personal or professional life where this is just something that you're like, I can do this? Do you have staying power? Do you usually quit things pretty often? Do you get excited and have, a kind of a flash in the pan? We've all done it. I've been in business masterminds, I've been in content creator masterminds, I've done weight loss challenges, I've done all kinds of things, and many things I've quit because I didn't really have the feel for it and I didn't know if I was going to do it long term. But there's other things in my life, like sobriety. Like, I gave up drinking about 4 years ago. Can I do that for the next 5 years? The way it's going, absolutely. Can I be a good dad? Could I be a good husband for the next 5 years? Yes. Do I want to keep running a business for the next 5 years? Yes. It's simple. So if you can't answer that question and you can't say to yourself, I absolutely can podcast for the next 5 years, just all the logistics aside, is this something you can do for the next 5 years? If the answer is yes, then you should continue and push forward with where we're going. And if the answer is no, then you should just stop watching now and wrap it up. Now, I don't say that to discourage you. I say that because some of the best podcasters out there have made very public how many episodes it took before something even hit. Check out this clip from Bradley, which is very recent and very timely on the expectations and what you have to do in order to succeed in podcasting.
People say, Brad,
how'd your podcast get so big? I've been trying to do a podcast.
and I say, how many episodes do they have? And they say
4.
And I say, I've got 700 near. Go do 700 of them and tell me if you're still in the same boat. I call them back 6 months later. How you doing? What episode you on?
Oh, I quit.
Okay. Then other ones, hey, how you doing?
Dude, I'm on episode 280. We're freaking number 9 on the freaking, business podcast list in iTunes. We're freaking kicking it. People are paying me to freaking, dude, it's blowing up. Unbelievable.
What's the difference? One did the work, bro. That's why they call it work, because it works. Most people aren't willing to do the work.
And here's Alex Hormozy, who has absolutely dominated social media and podcasting, especially in the last probably 1 to 2 years. But here's what he had to say about his podcasting journey. This is why I say, if you can't do it for the next 5 years, then you're just gonna find yourself really unhappy and really impatient. So let's get on to the next question, which is, what are your expectations from this podcast? Now, I don't know this audience yet, okay? I'm not exactly sure who you all are, but I cannot wait to find out. But here's one thing I could definitely tell you a lot of people want to start a podcast for, and that is for leads. Entrepreneurs really get it. They're in the content game. They know what's going on, and they are looking at all the available mediums and channels that they can expand their business or their offering or their services. And because a podcast is a highly engaged audience, that's what they want to do. They want a podcast, and they immediately think, and it works in some of the cases, but they immediately think, if I have a podcast, that's going to be more leads. It's a marketing channel. channel, I'll have more distribution, all these other things, okay? Number two, in terms of expectations, would be thought leadership. A lot of people start a podcast because they want to be thought leaders. Two of our clients, D. Marshall and Mita Malik, have a podcast that we launched for them about 2 years ago called Brown Table Talk. They got picked up by LinkedIn. They are clearly and very much perceived as thought leaders. They're also already two of LinkedIn's top voices. So they are sparking the conversation about people of color or women of color in the workplace. And this gives a ton of credibility to their already amazing qualifications so they can become thought leaders in the space. Now, thought leadership can seem kind of vague, but depending on your industry, your expertise, whatever it may be, if you want to be a leader in how this industry or this genre or this whatever is perceived, then this obviously can be a good medium, and that is a desire of many people. Status. We all care about our status. Whether you like it or not, you care about your status one way or the other. You care about the car you drive, you care about how you show up in public, how you dress, you care about your hygiene. That's why you get haircuts. You care about how your personal brand is coming across online. You care about how your business's brand is coming across online. But we all want status in one way or another, and a podcast is a way to achieve that, and this is what people desire. Podcasting is a huge opportunity in terms of being able to be an authority and to rank, okay? So the status is you being an authority in the space. And how can you say you're an authority? Not just because you have a podcast, you could say so because you have the potential to rank in the top 200, top 100, top 50 of your respective category or of all podcasts. You could have numbers for your global reach. There's just so many factors. You can't do that with Instagram. You can't do that with YouTube per se. Unless you're Mr. Beast and you are clear and far and above everyone else and the number one YouTuber, you can't say you're the number one Instagrammer, but you can say I have the number 3 podcast in the business category, or I have the number 1 podcast in self-improvement. There's so many opportunities in the podcast space. That's why people kind of flood to it. So if that's along your line of thinking, then yes, I would confirm that potential to increase your status is very real. And if you increase that status, what does that do? That helps you potentially be looked at for a book, be looked at to be on other podcast interviews, increases your social media content reach. So there's a lot of factors involved there, but yes, status is one of them. Don't act like you don't have it. We all have egos. It's there for the taking. Another reason I would say is a passion project. We had a client named Monica who was exiting her business. She sold her business after many years, and she wasn't sure what to do afterwards. And she had lost both her parents shortly before she sold her business. And because of this, she realized that she never had the conversations with her parents about what to do at this part of her life. 50s, female entrepreneur, successful. So what she started doing was interviewing the mothers of female entrepreneurs who were successful. And it was incredible. This was a passion project. She had absolutely no expectations of it, but what it turned out to be was more kind of like a family heirloom. So getting these mothers or this family on a podcast was also going to be something that, when they pass in the future, they will still have available, and they could talk about their backgrounds. They could talk about the stage of their life. They could talk about their upbringing. They could talk about so many different things that are interesting. Monica was an incredible host with an incredible vision, and we made it come to life. And it's simple. I mean, there's no pressure in a passion project. Again, you just have to refer back to the next videos and make the pros and cons list in order to determine, is this really something I want to do? Another question you have to ask yourself is, what is your listener promise? This is completely driven by why you want to do the podcast in the first place. And hopefully it's to serve other people. While it is a creative outlet, usually making content, at least nowadays, is very much about providing value if you're doing it right. So in this case, what is your listener promise? And this by far is the biggest driver and the thing that will help you avoid pod fade, which we talked about earlier. The listener promise is what you promise to give them and how you promise to give it to them. Now, this is more along terms of formatting, but if you have a listener promise, and I'll give you an example, NFTs for newbies. My friend Heather and I had a podcast. It exploded. I believe we did 100,000 downloads in 100 days. We did 1 million downloads in 8 months. Our promise was to publicly learn about NFTs when NFTs were on fire and they were hot. And the reason is we didn't know anything about them, but we had spent thousands of dollars acquiring some of them. We were in all the Discords, we were going crazy, but we actually had no idea what was going on. And we knew we weren't the only people who had that question. So our listener promise was to teach everything we possibly can about NFTs. We would do the research for you, we would have fun doing it, and we would do it in 15-minute video podcast episodes. And that's exactly what we did. And we also interviewed experts, of course, as well. Some of those were a little bit longer, so we violated our promise by going over 15 minutes. But for the most part, we fulfilled our promise, and that was the driver of the show, and it kept it going and it kept it red hot. But if we did not have that listener promise, we probably would have strayed in a lot of different directions. It would have been an unfocused podcast. And that's why at the time we were the #1 podcast in the world about NFTs, even though there was tons of them. We kept our promise. We had our North Star. And if you don't have that, if you don't have that listener promise, then again, this probably is not a good idea. Critical question you need to ask yourself next is, do I have 10 episode ideas up here? What you think about is what you should make content about. And if you want to take that a next step, if there's a hack, if people have ever told you need to be making content about that, or you need to write a book, or you need to start a podcast, then you should probably listen to them. Whatever it is that you have granular expertise in and you could just break down simply for people is going to be huge, and that should be an indicator. Now, when it comes to podcasting, I could talk about podcasting for hours and hours. So as I was getting started prepping these videos, I mean, this isn't a podcast, but I knew I had at least 25 videos off the bat about the podcast process and how I can help you all out. Now, if you are not in that boat, okay, don't worry, don't be afraid yet. And the reason is we have onboarding calls with some of our clients and they don't believe they have a lot of podcast ideas or episode ideas, and all we literally do is just ask them questions about what they do, why they do it, what their success has been, where they failed, and all these different things. And next thing you know, at the end of the call, we're like, hey, we got 20 episode ideas for you right now. When do you want to start? The questions you're answering for people most often are usually podcast ideas. Now, this podcast idea that you have, if you can't think easily about at least the first 10 episodes, then maybe you should reconsider. Now, final piece on this. You might not have the 10 ideas in your head yet. And the only time that would happen is kind of like I mentioned earlier about NFTs for newbies, is like we didn't know, but we planned, okay, like what is Ethereum? Okay, like what is a smart contract? Like it was absolutely the basics. So you probably actually have an upper hand if you want to learn in public, okay, because a lot of people are gonna have the same questions as you. And have you ever gone to YouTube to find something and the answer was just still too kind of over your head, it wasn't basic enough? You will really make a lot of people happy if you are able to simplify concepts or at least articulate them in a manner people can completely understand. So don't get scared if you don't have all the episode ideas yet. That's a way to do it. And if you aren't expert, start listing them out. And if you are finding yourself completely perplexed and not sure that you have any episode ideas that would be worthwhile, then again, maybe you should reconsider. All right, so right before we wrap up, I'll make sure I link an article that I found, 75 podcast ideas that Buzzsprout published. It's pretty broad, but it at least can jog your mind to determine like, okay, like this is the direction I feel like I'm going. This confirms it. Until you start actually recording and doing the podcast, you're not really gonna have a sense for the vibe and the feel and the frequency and the format and those kinds of things. So don't worry about that. Like the most important thing is you making the decision like, I'm absolutely doing this, or you know what? After this video that I watched, it ain't for me. The last thing I want to talk about is the niche. So if you wanted to start a fitness podcast, for example, that can be pretty broad and there's probably a ton. So I'm going to show you a little concept I learned here from $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi, who we mentioned earlier. And here he is talking about a niche product pricing example. The product is, let's just call it a course. Time management, $19. Time management for sales professionals, $99. Time management for outbound B2B sales, $499. Time management for outbound B2B power tools and gardening sale reps, $1,997. He was trying to make the point that you can charge more the more niche it is. And what I'm trying to tell you in terms of podcasting is, if it's a fitness podcast for veterans over 40 years old, I don't know, I'm over 40 years old and I'm a veteran and I always want to look like I actually served in the military. I want to be identifiable as a veteran. So if there was a podcast, something along those lines, I would feel like it's speaking specifically to me. So if you're up here, try and go a little bit more granular, and that is probably going to help you. So niche down on that podcast idea if you feel like it's too broad as it is, and you will get places. If you have not liked and subscribed and put the notifications on for this channel, go ahead and do that now, because I want you to continue to get information about podcasting that is going to help you. I have nothing to sell you right now. I don't. I mean, like, we have a completely different full service podcast offering. This is for the person who is just thinking about it, wanting to do it, and I just want to give everything I possibly can to you guys. So go ahead and leave me a comment, especially if you have any questions, and we will be sure to get back to them. We will see you next video, where I'm going to start reaching out to potential guests, because that is one of the hardest things to do, and if you master that early, then you're not going to have any issues later.